From cyberbullying to school violence, you're watching part 2 of our focus on bullying right here on A Healthier Charlotte. Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of A Healthier Charlotte. I'm your host, Bobby DeMuro. Today on the show, we will continue our discussion on bullying, cyberbullying, and school violence with a new guest panel that can dive into bullying's effect on students and where we're headed in the crusade against bullying here in Charlotte. Let's go right to the panel today and meet our guests. First at the far end of the table is Libby Seyfried, the Executive Director of Teen Health Connection here in town, a great nonprofit organization. Next to her is John Conselman in Bullying and Prevention Support at Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools. And finally, Ann Tompkins is the United States Attorney for the Western District of North Carolina. I feel like I'm on Law and Order just because I get to say that. I'm intimidated. So welcome to the show, everybody. Well, let's start out. John, maybe go to you first. In this day-to-day school environment, in CMS, frame the issue of bullying. We know it's important. We know what's happening. Is it something constant? Is it something you guys are prioritizing above a significant amount of other things? What's the look into bullying from CMS's perspective?
Bullying, it's a continuum of negative behaviors, and we are looking at focusing on those negative behaviors before they become bullying. And we really want to emphasize that. We want to build that empathy and compassion, and we want to be able to track what those negative behaviors are, how they're being used, and how we can build strategies for interventions that are going to create a safer school climate.
And you know, Libby, I'm really interested to hear your perspective because the nonprofit perspective, I think, is kind of unique in this space. Teen Health Connection does a lot. One of the things you do, a little bit of some psychological support, but mainly more physical health. But from your perspective, do you see a lot of teenagers coming with kind of bullying-related problems and concerns? I mean, is that a big issue when people walk through the door?
Well, it is an issue because it's about relationships. And so thinking developmentally, where an adolescent is, it's about developing relationships, peer as well as within their context or their community. I think what's interesting, in Teen Health Connection, we provide both, physical health care as well as mental health care, outpatient care. And we also have a Center for Disordered Eating. And one patient in particular came to be seen what her parents thought was an eating disorder. And she came in, actually met with Dr. Matkins, who's also been on your program before. And during the time that Dr. Matkins spent with her, she found out that the reason that this young lady wasn't eating before school or at lunch, it wasn't because she had an eating disorder. It's because she didn't want to go to the bathroom. And because if she drank or ate anything, then during the school day she'd be in the bathroom where she didn't feel safe, where she was, encountering, being bullied. And so that was really interesting, So you'll see how bullying can manifest in lots of ways. Physical health, mental health, and all the way around. And I think that an important component of that, though, is that oftentimes the bully has also been a victim.
Yeah.
And we know that the long-term negative consequences for bullying are even more significant for somebody who's also been a victim and is a bully. So, I mean, it's not so simple. It's very complex. It's human behavior. We can't say, oh, good person, bad person. It's not like that.
The long term is something I want to get to in a minute because that's just so vast of a topic. We'll never be able to cover it all. But John, in the short term, when we look at CMS, I know you guys have an urgency to fight this and to get kids the resources and the help that they need. Are you seeing more young people come to you in the last several years versus, maybe 5 or 10 years ago? Or has the urgency and the number of young people affected by this always kind of been the same?
It depends on how we're looking at bullying. When we look at the true definition of bullying, I think that we're actually the numbers are going down. The perception of what bullying is, and I've been hurt or somebody said a mean thing to me, and they call that bullying, well, then the numbers can go up. It's that mean behavior. How do we define that? And we do have a very strong definition for it.
And let's talk definition now. From the legal perspective, what constitutes bullying? I know a lot of states are maybe trying to come up with laws to define it and to have anti-bullying legislation, but is there something we can look at that we know this is bullying, this is what it looks like, and this is what we should do about it?
I don't come at bullying as a criminal act per se. There's not the crime of bullying. There are assaults that may happen in a bullying incident. But so our perspective is not bullying as a crime. Rather, it is the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Department of Justice giving assistance in anti-bullying efforts as an anti-violence program.
Sort of a prevention.
Absolutely, crime prevention, and it's a huge part of that.
Where does cyberbullying come in here? Because I have a feeling a lot of law enforcement agencies are really struggling with. We've seen some cases in the media of people
Right.
getting bullied and terrible things happening. How far away is the law? How far away is maybe the Department of Justice from really nailing down something on cyberbullying and then seeing a lot of progress being made to prevent it and to maybe stop it?
Cyberbullying, it can be a criminal act because you can threaten someone over, the internet. So that can be a crime. I think for the purposes of bullying as we're defining it today, it is really more the mechanism by which the bullying behavior happens. In criminal law, there has been one case that was unsuccessful against a parent. I mean, these are all cases that we would bring would be against adults.
Yeah.
And that was a novel theory that ultimately was unsuccessful. So I think, we're trying to work on what are the best mechanisms to try to stop bullying, and I think criminal law is usually the least effective in this kind of behavior.
Even if it may be the least effective, do we need more? This sounds maybe bad or ineffective, but do we need more example cases like that brought against the parent to get people aware of this, or does that maybe do more harm than good?
I think that from our perspective, when people ask me, what does the Department of Justice, why do we care about bullying? And we come at it from a couple perspectives. One is the crime prevention perspective. We do a lot of work with kids in general, in gang intervention and in anti-bullying to try to help kids get the tools that they need not to be a bully and not to be bullied as a crime prevention. We also look at it as a civil rights issue.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that kids are getting the education that they are guaranteed to get. So we come at it from those two perspectives.
And Libby, Ann mentioned something about cyberbullying, and we're talking about the law and technology, and just by virtue of working with teenagers, you guys are kind of forced into that space, maybe more than you want to be, because they're there all the time.
Absolutely.
What is the major challenge with that? It seems to me, and we talked about this on the first episode, that technology makes bullying a 24/7 thing that these victims have to suffer with. Is it just that it's more invasive, or is it maybe that it's also more subtle and kids don't quite know how to cope with that like they would just walking away from a face-to-face confrontation?
Well, I think that the invasive, yes. There's the anonymity
Yeah.
component. When you have bullying that's happening in a group setting, then you can have somebody intervene, whereas this is happening in the privacy of my home. There was a recent study done by it was in the Journal for Adolescent Health, and it talked about looking at kids and breaking it up into cyberbullying and non-cyberbullying. And they took it even a step further, and they looked at bias-based bullying. And these are kids that are bullied because of their perceived, true or not perceived, sexual orientation, body size, and their ethnicity. And that kids who have the bias-based bullying, because it's really about who I am. I'm being bullied not because I did something comical or silly or I made a mistake. It's because I am bad. I am. So bias-based is much more difficult to deal with that. But then you throw in the cyber-based bullying on top of that. So kids who are bullied because of bias-based bullying and cyberbullying are actually almost 8 times more likely to have a suicide attempt than somebody who's not being harassed.
Yeah.
And whereas the kids who are not bias-based but just cyber-based bullying, they're 4 times more likely than kids who are, that aren't being harassed to have a suicide attempt.
But it sounds like at the end of the day, bias-based or not, cyberbullying is having a pretty strong effect.
Huge.
Yeah.
on all kids. And think about this old episode of Andy Griffith, and Opie was being bullied for his milk money. You might have seen it. And the very last scene, Andy and Opie are sitting in front of the courthouse. You like this, Ann? Andy and Opie in front of the courthouse, and Opie's got a black eye. And Andy tells him, son, I'm so proud of you because you stood up for yourself to that bully. That's how it used to be, okay? But now we've got kids that have guns, that have weapons, and we have, technology that abounds everywhere.
Yeah.
So we can't take that approach anymore. And I love what John said and what they said in the earlier episode about empathy building.
Yeah.
And that's really what it's about. And it's about having people that have your back.
Open question, maybe I don't know who's best qualified to answer this, but if it's about empathy building, knowing that it's getting more difficult to maybe combat bullying using the Andy Griffith metaphor, do we start now to divert young people from getting to bullying in the first place and sort of stop that cycle right now? But the bigger question to me is what happens to 12 and 15 and 17-year-olds? Are they just kind of left free? I mean, what do we do for them clinically to get them past this?
Well, I don't think we ever give up on people. And I think that we can look at 40 and 50-year-olds
Right.
and look at empathy building. I mean,
Yeah.
you could look at what's going on in our political arena right now and think about all the bullying that goes on and the stigma that's attached to mental health and just all of the different issues that we have going on. So I think there's a lot that can be done. There was a recent campaign, and I shared this with Ann earlier, and it was called the National Stand-Up Day. And there was a young high school freshman who was bullied because he had a pink shirt on. And other kids stepped up and said, hey, that's not okay. And so the whole school created this campaign where everybody came to school wearing a pink shirt. Well, this has turned into an international campaign, the National Stood Up Day. And we actually had pink T-shirts that said "Stood Up" on the front of it, but on the back was a pledge to say, no longer would I stand by and watch this. I've got your back. And that's what we have to do when we see it. We have to stand up. We have to model that behavior.
I love it. Stick with us. More in the second segment. I want to get into some of the legal definitions, a little bit different stuff. But next up, first on the show, our favorite blogger, Kelly Davis, is talking nutrition, and we've got her in the kitchen again, cooking up healthy, easy-to-prepare meals right now on A Healthier Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Kelly from foodiefresh.com, and today I want to talk about what are some things that are really great to eat for your pre-workout and your post-workout. So I have some ingredients here that you could use to create really delicious snacks right before you work out and right after that's going to help you through your workout and help you recover from your workout. So for a pre-workout snack, I like to rely on carbohydrates to help power me through my workouts. Some of the things that I would suggest people eat are some very low processed type foods. A banana is a really good thing. If you like bananas, maybe a banana with peanut butter. I know peanut butter is more of a fat protein type thing, but it's okay to incorporate those foods as well as long as you get in the carbohydrates. Other things that would be a really good thing to eat is Wassa crisp breads or any kind of cracker that you like with some hummus. Bars are really good that have a lot of carbohydrates in them. Dried fruit is a really good option. I have prunes here, but also dried figs, dried dates are really delicious things to eat right before a workout. Maybe even a little bit of instant oatmeal. I have rice cakes here. I know rice cakes kind of get a bad rap sometimes as being a diet food, but I really like how crunchy and salty they are, and they're a good mechanisms for other things like hummus and peanut butter. Right before your workout, you really want to play around with how much you want to eat. I had a hard time when I was first learning how to work out, and I knew I needed something on my stomach because I would get very hungry if I didn't eat something. If I didn't eat enough, I would get a little bit dizzy or run out of steam. But also there's a certain threshold you cross over where you're eating a little too much and then you feel sick. So really play around with what works for you, because what works for you isn't always going to work for someone else. And what I eat isn't necessarily going to be the amount that you should be eating. So play around with that and figure out what works for you. When I've had a really tough workout, I'm going to need something that's going to replenish me, and I think protein does a really great job at doing that. Some of the things that I rely on to make sure I'm getting some protein after my workout is Greek yogurt. You could also try any kind of yogurt that you like, regular yogurt, flavored yogurt, plain yogurt, any yogurt that has a good amount of protein. Protein powder to make a small smoothie. Usually what I'll do is take a full smoothie recipe that I would usually make and half it, and that makes just enough if I just need a snack to tide me over to my next meal after a hard workout. Another great option is hard-boiled eggs. Maybe you'll eat that by itself or on toast. It's okay, it's perfectly okay to have some carbs in with your post-workout meal, but the thing you want to concentrate on is the protein, because that's going to replenish your muscles.
Welcome back into A Healthier Charlotte in part 2 of our focus on bullying and school violence, and let's jump right back into it. And maybe starting with you, this might be more of a psychological question. We asked this on the first panel, but from the legal perspective, what do you see as some of the causes of bullying? The power imbalance that we're talking about earlier, does that play in here?
Without a doubt, and I think that some of the, I would call it more correlation or behaviors that are correlated rather than a cause. But it is a control issue, it's a power issue, and that's not only true with bullying, but it's true of a lot of crimes.
Yeah.
Another correlation that we see is domestic violence. And so children who have domestic violence in the home are more likely to be bullies at school. And I think that's part of that power and control.
And John, you know, in a perfect world, CMS would have all the funding they needed, and every school district would, and you could refer to psychologists and do whatever. The way that it is in reality right now, how do you guys prioritize funding? I mean, are you doing enough to prevent bullying from each individual student's perspective when they come to you? Is the process, do you send them to a clinician? I mean, what's the process look like for those kids?
Our schools do a really good job. And, you know, yes, we don't have the funding that we would like to have, but we have to work with the funding we do have. And every school, I mean, we have prevention plans in place. You know, we have schools that have bully prevention teams together that look in and assess what their climate needs and put in specific strategies to meet those needs. They look at individual students and they build strategies for individual students, both the aggressors as well as the targets. I mean, they're doing a really good job out there.
And can I jump in? Because,
Absolutely.
Because John and I worked together with other partners on the Engage Summit just a couple of weeks ago, which was bringing kids in, and I'll let John talk more about it, but this was a partnership of a lot of members of the community to get students in CMS to be the ones to look at the issue and start bringing out some of their own ways to solve the problem.
And I think it goes back to what Libby said, and even in our first panel or our first segment, we're looking at the high school right now. These kids went through elementary, middle, and now they're in high school. They've dealt with the problems or have seen the problems all the way through. And now we want to empower them because that's the solution. These kids are the solutions. Us adults, we can support them, but it's going to come from the students themselves. It's going to come from the kids to be able to have that empowerment of speaking up and saying, you know, this is wrong, this is what we need, and for us to provide them the tools to make that happen.
You know, Josh Alexander on the first episode kind of started to talk about the kids need to have a discussion themselves. Is that where this needs to go? I mean, adults can talk about this all day. Do we need the kids to be more involved themselves?
Absolutely. And when you look at a bullying incident, and I think Josh brought this up, was that, you know, when that target is being targeted and everybody else is watching this, they're going to side with the aggressor because they don't want to be that next target. It's scary. And then that target, or now the victim, is through shame and secrecy, okay, I don't want to be that target. And it's very shameful. And then the bystanders that are watching this all of a sudden don't want to associate and even alienate that individual more. They want to stay away from that child.
Yeah. Libby, is there a bigger issue lurking here? I mean, these kids who have been through bullying, whether it's at any age, elementary, middle, high school, when they get out, if they don't see the right people, if they're not fortunate enough to get in front of the right psychologist, the right doctor, is there a larger issue here? We mentioned domestic violence. Are we just waiting for a, you know, monster kind of hiding behind the curtain when these kids become adults and don't know how to cope with some of these other issues?
Well, I think that clearly we know that kids who have experienced any kind of violence or trauma, and it can be bullying, it could be, you know, Child Protective Services involvement, DSS involvement, we know that these kids are more at risk for developing substance abuse issues, depression, anxiety, you know, and I loved what Josh had said earlier, that, you know, then kids will self-medicate. You know, when we go down here, I mean, look, here we are in Charlotte, and we are 5th in the nation for black tar heroin use.
Yeah.
5th, okay? And the best place for kids to buy their dope is at the Arboretum. You know, and the kids that are most likely to engage in those behaviors are kids that have $25 or more of expendable income. That's $5 a day for lunch. There are lots of fallout issues, you know, and we talk about how do we engage these kids and how do we make change? Well, we have to model that change, you know, and maybe it's, yeah, the kids have to take responsibility and get involved, but we as adults, you know, we can't, you know, road hog, yell at people, slam, do, you know, we've got to model that in all of our interactions.
Yeah, and maybe when we look at the culture of empathy we talked about earlier, and this culture of violence we're perpetrating more than the culture of empathy, we're not being very good models. I mean, to be frank, as adults,
Right.
we may be more aware of this because we're talking about, but the average adult may not be doing a very good job.
And we may not even be aware when we do it, and
Yeah.
we're aware of it.
Yeah. What about school violence, John? We were talking off air about this, and I know you have something, you kind of feel strongly about this with the Columbine issue we mentioned earlier. How do we, I don't want to say plan for bullying to escalate to violence, but how do we kind of account for that, and where do we look towards combating school violence as it fits into this whole issue?
What we learned from Columbine is we have to set a school climate that is positive and it's welcoming for every student. We can't set adults can't set the perception that everybody has to be involved in sports, and that's, if you're not involved in sports, then you're a nobody. We have to set a climate that everybody is a somebody,
And that was-
that we're all supporting.
And that was
somebody.
big at Columbine, that the kids felt they were bullied or whatever because they weren't involved in sports.
That's one of the reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, there are many layers of what happened at Columbine, and there was some inappropriate behaviors towards these individuals. Whether it led to bullying, I don't know enough about it. But it's a climate, and we need to set a climate that is welcoming for everyone.
Speaking of setting this climate, Ian, you mentioned earlier when we look at the case being brought against the mother, case being brought against the parent, what responsibility do parents need to take? I mean, I can sit here and say, oh, yeah, it's pretty important. But when I talk to older people, adults who have now kind of come through this thing, the reaction I get a lot of times is, oh, it's kids being kids. We've all been bullied. And to a certain extent, that is a little true. We have kind of all been dealt with that. But is that really short-sighted from an adult to say that and kind of absolve themselves of the responsibility?
It is short-sighted, and I think part of what we're doing here is making sure that adults do understand the pervasiveness of it, the ongoing harassment that makes this conduct different. And so, when we talk to kids, we also try to talk to their parents to make sure that the parents are on guard to try to recognize signs of being withdrawn or physical violence, to monitor their kids' Facebook and their use of their devices so that they are really on top of this. And also so that they understand the seriousness of the conduct. It's not a rite of passage to be continuously harassed.
In Libby, a Teen Health Connection, you don't just work with the teens. I mean, you have to work with parents.
Absolutely.
Do you, I mean, I don't know if you've quantified this or not, but can you kind of ballpark when a teen comes in with a bullying-related issue, when the parents are here, they have a better prognosis than when the parents aren't? I mean, does stuff like that go on?
Yeah, absolutely. We know without a shadow of a doubt that, parents who are involved, you're going to have better outcomes.
Yeah.
Because kids need parents. Like, we're the guide rails, to keep the kids sort of on the path. They've got to be able to weeble and wobble a little bit, sort of like when you were learning to walk at, 8 or 9 months or a year old, and we'd let the kids kind of wobble. Same thing with an adolescent. We need parents to be those guide rails, but allow them, ample room to fall and pick them up and help them out. But it's also, again, I go back to that acceptance. We talked about domestic violence, and if you have a girl or a boy, anybody who's been bullied, and that's the thing I want to say too, we have lots of intimate partner violence that happens, and it's not always boys as perpetrators. I mean, really and truly, some of our girls are very violent, but yet we have this culture where it's okay for a boy. I mean, it's not okay for a boy to hit a girl, but somehow it's okay if I pinch John. But it's not okay. Nobody should ever hit or hurt anybody.
Yeah.
And so we have that double standard, and so that continues on and perpetuates.
Are we seeing more girls become bullies and girls commit acts of violence? Are the numbers up? I mean, we see more cases, or just maybe that we're more aware of it?
Well, I'm sure Ann can speak to that.
I think with cyberbullying, you see girls being cyberbullies more than the one-on-one sort of face-to-face bullies.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the mean girl syndrome takes the next step.
Yeah.
So we have that relational bullying compared to the physical bullying.
And there is a distinct difference between how boys and how girls, how we see bullying in the schools.
So, John, where are we headed? I mean, you can't predict the future, and if you can, give me a lot of numbers. But where are we headed? I mean, in 10 years, we won't completely eradicate bullying. We're never going to get it completely down to, a rate of 0. But is the prognosis good? I mean, are conversations like this good for the future here?
Yes, absolutely. And it's going to take a whole team of the community to really get together, keeping that dialogue going to make a difference.
Right, and I think the prognosis is very good.
Yeah.
I mean,
Me
so I'm almost 50, and I can remember back when we didn't have seatbelts in our car, and my mom and dad smoked at the car, and the windows were rolled up. We can't even imagine that now.
It takes time.
It does, but together, working together, we can make change. We are making change.
Are conversations like this good? I guess I'll open up to all of you for the last question. Whoever wants to jump for it. We had a student on the first panel, which is important to talk to kids about it. But even just adults having this conversation, do we need more people talking about this openly, whether it's on TV or not?
Yeah, without a shadow of
Yeah.
a doubt. We recently did a play with Northwest School of the Arts, same school that Josh attends, and it's called The Big Picture. And the kids it was a play that was written by teens for teens to talk about health topics. And they did a fabulous job talking about bullying. But what was interesting is at the community performance, when the adults watched it, they got it at a different level because they could see it through the teens' eyes, through the teens' experience. So it's not only for us to have conversations, but it's for us to have conversations with teens, which is why I
Yes.
really appreciated you having Josh here.
Yeah, good stuff. He was great. You guys were great. Thank you very much for coming on. Really helpful stuff to understanding it. And we are out of time. This week on A Healthier Charlotte, that's it. I want to remind you at home to visit cltblog.com for more unique news, info, and current events here in the Queen City that you just can't get anywhere else. For our guests on the panel and for our crew here in the studio, thank you so much for joining us this week. I'm reminding you that as you go along, you don't need talent, you just need courage. I'm Bobby DeMuro, and this has been A Healthier Charlotte.